Here we go. Okay, so good morning, everybody. We're continuing our studies of this book, Gates of Trust. We're going to continue using our edition that we're using, the new Chayenu/Kahos edition. The good news from the publisher is that more books will be available soon. Yesterday, we read on page 7 of the book. For those of you who have the book, we quoted 3 verses. The first verse says, Baruch HaGever Asher Yiftach B'Hashem V'Hoya Hashem Yiftachai. Blessed is the man who relies on God, and the Lord will be his support. We then read the second verse on a similar theme, and the positive fortune is the man who made the Lord his support and did not turn to the haughty and those who turn to falsehood. And the converse of the first verse, which is found in the same chapter of Jeremiah, is Or HaGever Asher Yiftach B'Adam. As it says, cursed is the man who relies in man and makes flesh his arm, and his heart turns away from the Lord. And we spoke yesterday about how unreliable it is to trust on anything other than God. God is the eternal rock that we can always rely on, whereas if we rely on false gods or false senses of assurance, we're doomed. That was what we spoke about yesterday. And we obviously have to continue this conversation, and there is a lot more to discuss. Misguided trust is another one of the things that we need to discuss, which is today's topic, that instead of having tranquility, which one is the benefits of believing in Hashem, if you have misguided trust, it will obviously lead to all kinds of negative places. And this is similar to what we spoke about yesterday. It's a continuation of the theme, and we will talk about that in just a moment. So let's read it inside. The introduction here and the commentary says, until now, the author has been explaining in general terms that when a person relies on anything other than God, he is doomed to fail. Now the author brings specific examples of things that people tend to place their trust in, how they do not provide security. In English, if he relies on his wisdom, his schemes, his physical strength, and his own efforts, those efforts will be for naught. He will become weak and lose that physical strength, and his schemes and wisdom will fall short of accomplishing his goals. As the verse says in Job, he traps clever people in their own shrewdness. This verse is brought as proof that man cannot rely on his plans, however shrewd they may be. In other words, we all know, it's funny, it's not funny, but it's serious. There's so many unknowns that as much as we think we know, we realize how little we actually know about anything. And that humility is probably the wisest thing we could possibly have. And with that humility it brings a person to understand that they can't really trust their own understandings, but you can trust to such a. And he'll explain this whole concept again. This is just the introduction at greater length through the book. And it says, I returned and saw and understand that the race does not belong to the swift. This is from Ecclesiastes, from Koheles, the wisdom of King Solomon. And Koheles is a brilliant book. And at some point, we should probably do a course in Koheles and read Koheles together. Maybe that'll be our next project. I've got to be careful what I offer in my next projects, because certainly somebody's going to take me up on it, and we're going to be learning Koheles for the next 10 years. Although that's probably the wise thing for us to do. But anyway, I'm not afraid. Let's do it, guys. And it says in Koheles, I returned and saw under the sun that the race does not belong to the swift, nor the war to the mighty, and the wise do not have bread. In other words, the things that you think would give sense of security at the end of the day are just illusionary. It would be expected that those who are physically strong would win the war. This verse shows that physical strength and intelligence cannot be relied on for success without God's blessing. And as it says in Psalms, now it's interesting when we read this one in Hebrew, there's a chapter, a verse in Psalms that says, Young lions suffer want and are hungry, but those who seek the Lord do not lack any good. Now, when do we say that on a daily basis, on a very regular basis? Anyone remember? When do we say, what's the next verse? And then it goes into it's at the end of benching, at the end of the grace after meals. Every time we eat bread, we say this prayer. And we said yesterday we quoted Baruch HaGever Asher Yiftach B'Hashem, and I started today with it again. Blessed is the man who trusts in Hashem. 2 verses before this, we always say this one. Young lions suffer want and are hungry, but those who seek the Lord do not lack any good. In other words, every day when we thank Hashem for our sustenance, for our food, and our grace after meals, we recite this verse and the one we quoted earlier. We say, young lions suffer want and are hungry, but those who seek the Lord do not lack any food. And then we say, blessed is the man who trusts in Hashem. In other words, when we thank Hashem for our food, for the very food on our tables that we ate, we have the humility to understand that but for the blessing of Hashem, we wouldn't be eating right now. Don't take anything for granted. A humble, wise man realizes that anything can change in a minute, and how reliant we are at all times in the blessings of Hashem. And we say this, we remind ourselves of this every time we eat. He continues and says, the young lions in the verse refer to strong people who rely on their strength. The verse teaches that they are destined to be poor and hungry. On the other hand, those who seek God, meaning those who rely on God, will not lack any goodness. The philosophy of this we did yesterday. From the above verses, we see that a person cannot rely on his own talents for his success. Only a person who relies on God is guaranteed to be taken care of. Now, in case you think we're anti-work, you should know one of the things that Hashem requires us to do is to go and work. So we work because Hashem says we have to work, but we recognize that the blessing comes from Hashem. And this is a theme that we are going to explore at greater length in the main body of the text of this book of Sha'arei B'Tochen, because here we are learning, it's just the introduction. So we have to go to work, but we understand that the blessing comes from Hashem. And if we don't understand that, we're in big trouble. We're very vulnerable. And we'll be very anxious. Because knowing this brings tremendous tranquility, as we will read some more. And now he says a fascinating thing. Page 9 at the top of the page. Having discussed how a person who relies on his own talents will not be successful, the author now turns to address a person who relies on his wealth. And if he relies on his abundance of wealth, it will be removed from him and left to someone else. We're so vulnerable if we're relying only on our money. God can instantly take one's money and give it to someone else. And the most dangerous thing is not to recognize that it's all Hashem's blessing. The author now quotes verses that illustrate the transitory nature of wealth. And again, we're going to talk about this at greater length in the main body of the text. As the verse says in Job, and Job is the ultimate example of a man who had every blessing in the world and had it all taken away from him by Hashem. And unfortunately, we probably all know people that had money and then they lost it all. And everybody has a reason why this or why that or why this, but at the end of the day, nobody knows anything. It's all in the hands of God. And instead of this making us anxious, this can actually make us feel tranquil. Because when we realize, and we're going to talk about this later, that we're in God's good hands, we'll feel life is a lot safer. As the verse says in Job, a rich man lies down with his wealth intact. He opens his eyes and it's no longer his. Similarly, the verse says in Proverbs, do not toil to become wealthy. From your own understanding, desist. And the next verse says, before you can set your eyes on it, it's gone. Similarly, it says in Jeremiah, at a young age, his wealth will leave him, and at his end, he will be a disgrace. And then he continues with a fascinating thing. He says, alternatively, even if the riches themselves are not removed from him, his ability to enjoy the wealth will be withheld from him by God. So you might have a person who remains very wealthy, but he never gets any pleasure from that wealth. And I'm sure we all know people that have a lot of wealth and they remain anxious about their wealth their whole lives. So for whatever reason, they're not blessed with tranquility in their lives. So having money itself, I remember hearing a quote, I don't remember who it's from, that somebody said about someone else, he's so poor, all he has is money. Alternatively, even if the riches themselves are not removed from him, his ability to enjoy the wealth will be withheld from him by God. As the wise man, King Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, God gives him no power to eat of it. Page 10, if God doesn't want him to derive any enjoyment from his riches, why then does God leave it in his possession? It will be with him as a deposit, so that he will guard it from harm until the time that it will be returned to the one who's deserving of it and for whom it was meant. So this guy is only the bank for a while to hold on to it before eventually it lands up somewhere else. Now, all money eventually lands up somewhere else because none of us can take it with us to the next world. So the person the anxious person who's worrying about their money their whole life and doesn't trust in Hashem that he'll take care of them is literally like a deposit box, holding on to it for the next person to get it. At the very least, sometimes even in this lifetime, it's taken away from them. But if we trust in Hashem, then we can have tranquility. You don't have to worry about this issue. Doesn't mean you shouldn't work, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't be responsible. We're going to learn that Hashem wants us to work within natural means. But as we learned yesterday, if we give too much importance to nature, we're finished. Jews can't live with nature. It's too perilous an existence. This concept that sometimes a person is given wealth solely for the purpose of safeguarding it for another is supported by two verses. As it says in Ecclesiastes 2:26, and look at Solomon, who was the wisest of all men and the most wealthy of all men, was very aware when he was writing Ecclesiastes on the transitory nature of wealth. As it says in Ecclesiastes, and to the sinner, God gives the urge. This is fascinating. And to the sinner, God gives the urge to gather and amass wealth, to give to one who is good before God. In other words, only to hand it to someone else, as it says about Job. In the book of Job, not about Job, but in the book of Job, which the book of Job is the ultimate book Maybe when we finish doing Koheles, Ecclesiastes, we're going to have to do the book of Job as well. As it says in Job, Eov, the wicked man will prepare and the righteous man will use it. And the innocent will divide the money among themselves. The verse speaks about the wicked merely preparing for the righteous, implying that the wicked person does not derive any benefit from his wealth. We discussed two possibilities of what might happen to a person who relies solely on his wealth. Number one, he might lose it. Number two, even if he retains it, he will not be able to enjoy it. Now the author goes further and says that sometimes not only is he not able to enjoy his wealth, but the wealth itself causes bad things to befall him. Actually, the wealth can become a curse. It's possible that his money will be the cause of his misfortune, as well as the cause of destruction of his soul. Sometimes money can be the source of a person's physical and spiritual downfall. As the verse says again in Ecclesiastes, there is a sickening evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches hoarded by their owner to his own misfortune. Until now, the author elaborated on the first spiritual advantage of bitachon, namely that it causes the person to feel at ease, tranquility. A person who relies on other people, his own talents or wealth, will always worry that his success will not last. Just look again at top of page 11, that verse. As the verse says in Ecclesiastes 5:12, there's a sickening evil that I have seen under the sun, riches hoarded by their owner to his own misfortune. And I was reading this, and it reminded me of the story that probably you remember, but I don't remember, and I only know about from the Sichos of the Rebbe, from the Rebbe's talks. And that is the Rebbe spoke at great length when the multi-millionaire, if not billionaire, Howard Hughes died. Do you remember the story of Howard Hughes? So I don't, but I do know the Rebbe talking about it, and I brought it up over here. So Tzvi Freeman wrote up about it. Rebbe Howard Hughes Freeman. He wrote the story there, which I know I looked it up this morning, so I was able to find it over there. Why can't I find the story now? What happened over here? Google's failing me, everybody. I can't trust in Google. I can only trust in Hashem. Well, let's watch this video at least. So let me just fix my thing for sound and optimize the video for sharing. Hold on 1 second. Optimize for a video clip, and let's watch this video for a minute, and then I'll put the other one with a little essay about it. But the story, let's see what the Rebbe says over here. This is on a Facebook link. I don't know whose Facebook daily video of the Rebbe, whatever that is. Let me get the sound up. So the Rebbe was talking about this guy.
Gewesen ein Mensch, was hat $2 Milliarden in was durchgegangen sein Leben. Hat gewollt, irgendwo gehen, hat gedacht, mehr haben mit dem Schießen, mit dem Kidnappen, mit dem zunehmenden Geld, zunehmend bei zweiten Schrecken dafür. Gewollt etwas essen, hat mehr gehabt mit dem Obsam. Gewollt gezwungen, hat gedacht, machen bis so. Und wir sollen nicht wissen, wo gefunden ist. Und die Straße hat irgendwo gelebt, dass nicht gekonnt angehen. Der Fall ist Zachis gewesen, also da steht einer und wir bei $500 Millionen und da steht der zweite, was ist $100 Millionen und kann sich nirgends nicht errichten. Seiden er rumgeringelt mit Kamer wie Kamer Wodi, was in See alleine ist noch echt nicht sicher, Zimmer zu untergekehrt. Das heißt in andere Wörter, die $2 Millionen haben ihm nicht gegeben Cherus, sondern von ihm gemacht dem schwersten Ewer, was kann sein. Und auch das ist der Hero, was mir sagt jeder. Und wo das ist angekommen, bei Zeiten ist manche Szene. als wenn gefühlt sich ein Mensch in einer nämliche Freiheit, a Cheirus Amitis, wie Teres Emes verleihen, ist allen Menschen hängt das so von ihm. Und Bishar selber schließt bei sich, als darf sein frei, Kehlel eingeschlossen, echt frei von Teiles, wo sie losen nicht am Menschen leben ruhig, wo man ewer kotne jesch beodem. Roi masbi, roi vataiv hoten sich a teva, als geht noch, will sich dann noch, jesch limone, reize Mosayim, reize dalle dames, nicht auch dämmelt in Breger, nicht gesättigt. Wird ein Sklav und ein Knecht bei seinen eigenen Teilen. Bedugme wie gerät früher hat die $2 Billionen, was gekonnt sein, aber Labos auf See, und mit See gewältigen in alle gute Sachen, seine See geworden, aber Labos auf ihm, und haben nämlich gelost Leben, ein einfaches Leben, ein Laches, kamen wie kamen, nicht ein Leben, was mehr wie einfacher Leben. Und das hat jeder, da viele haben gefunden sich in Golus. A viele haben gefunden sich in der Golus von der Chescher Koffel und Chuppel. Bishas Ayid beschließt, als geht zu Chon, geräten zu Zmanche, Senu, zu Achaga, Pesach, Kosher und Sameach. Und damit hilft ihm der Ebestellung, die Niseis und die Schwierigkeiten werden als weniger und weniger.
Okay. So that was our video of the day. Just an interesting video. In other words, the Rebbe points out this reality. And I think this was in the 70s or the 80s. There was this guy, Howard Hughes. Anyone remember the story? And he was this absolute billionaire. And he became a slave to his anxieties about his money.
He was a hermit.
Pardon?
He was a hermit.
He was a hermit. He was an absolute hermit. So instead of being a blessing for him, it landed up being a curse. Now, obviously, he probably wasn't well. But the interesting part, at least, the point is the anxiety about the money that we do have without trust in Hashem can cause a person to question themselves. So, for example, I know a person who's very wealthy and he has a terrible time with friendships because he doesn't know if people really want to befriend him or if people want to be friends with his money. Complicated for that person. And for those that don't have money, by the way, there's no way to live other than with trust in Hashem. So the point is that trust in Hashem brings tremendous tranquility, and trust in anything else is very fragile, as we've established. So that is the lesson for today. We're going to stop here because we're trying to do half-an-hour classes. People have to get on with their day, but we can be sure that the source of blessing is trust in Hashem, and trusting in anything else is very dangerous. A reminder that tomorrow we will not be having a class, so we're continuing again on Thursday. Unfortunately, I can't tomorrow. I'm going to go to a funeral. But Thursday we will have class, and with God's help, we will keep on moving forward. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.